the future of NFTs in the metaverse, very deep conversation on self-sovereign identity and also trends and motivators to watch for in consumer demand. I'd like to thank Miko, Matsumura, Dirk for being returning panelists to some of our events. Miko, thank you for actually introducing us to a number of the speakers that were a part of today's event. It's been a hit. And then Netcath, Yatsu with Animoca Brands, thank you.
Thank you, glad to be here.
Okay, terrific.
Hello. Hello.
Miko, if you'd like to moderate this panel, you're a seasoned expert here and veteran at some of our events. So take it away.
Okay, I appreciate it. I think I'll just start with a brief statement. So from my perspective, you know, the panel is here. We have a short amount of time. I am going to have a very brief kind of self-introduction, just quickly. We do have some serious OGs here. Yatsu may go without introduction, but he's definitely a serious metaverse leader. So, it's great to have you on here. Dirk is with Upland, bringing football into the metaverse, which I think is very exciting. And of course, Ben is an old friend and someone who's been, investing and really reasoning about technology for quite some time. So I think add a great perspective to this. So, our topic today and job is to talk about the future of NFT. I think that what I'd like to touch on is we're going to really start with this transformation of play to earn gaming. And the reason why I'm kind of going to start there is simply because I think it's becoming increasingly clear that this is the pattern of mass adoption. And that we already see 1 million daily active users on Axie Infinity alone, and 18 million monthly active users just on that title. So I think that the spaceship has landed, and I think it's getting really serious up in here. So what I'd love to do is just have a quick introduction, starting with Yat and then Dirk and then Ben, and really just maybe you can inject, name and where you're from, and then also kind of the thing you're most excited about with respect to the future. So go ahead, Yat.
Great. Very quickly, my name is Yatsu, chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands. We've been basically building in the open metaverse with NFTs probably for about 4 years almost. Starting with CryptoKitties. We're very fortunate to be actually the lead investor in Axie Infinity. This was 3 years ago, which was, of course, at that time, considered very experimental. But we've now done over 100 investments in the space. We also own the sandbox. We're behind Rev Racing, and we continue to build out the space. And maybe the one thing that I'm super excited about is that, gaming is driving mass blockchain adoption. I think Axie Infinity is kind of like that Angry Birds moment of NFT gaming, I would say. But the other thing is interesting to me is that it really starts to clarify this idea of data ownership and what actual data property rights really means, which is very theoretical 3 years ago, but today people are beginning to really appreciate. And I think that's the revolution that's going to bring everyone on board when people say, actually, I do need to own my data. I do need to own my digital data. What does it mean? And hopefully that is the beginning of the true ownership parallel that we see with Web3. And I'll leave it at that.
No, it's exciting. And Dirk, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good evening. Hello from Silicon Valley. I'm actually originally from Germany, but I live here since many years. And I'm a co-founder of Upland. Upland is what we call it now today, NFT metaverse based on the real world, where people play, earn, and connect. And the story is like a year ago when people were asking, because we're always targeting, say, okay, we really want to go mass market. That's the way we've built Upland, starting mobile first. But, like a year ago, we were avoiding the word NFT roughly, right? I said, you know what, we cannot use that in marketing language. It's just too technical. Nobody will understand it. But I think, no, this has changed completely. And now we have to use it. Otherwise, we're not getting taken serious. So I'm super excited that the space is really taking off. I mean, we still all who are here, right? We still have to do a lot of things, like user experience has to improve, with the energy consumption topic, lots of things where we have to work on. But, I'm very hopeful, that we are solving this. And, I think we're maybe if you look at the whole day, maybe at, maybe at 1 o'clock in the morning, getting to mass adoption at this point.
Great. Terrific. And Ben, affiliation and the thing you're excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody. My name is Ben Metcalf. I'm the founder and general partner of Monochrome Capital. Among other things, we invest in Web3. I also saw an opportunity, a gap in the market around a data opportunity in the NFT space. I'm being a little cryptic at the moment because we decided to found and kick off a startup in this space, which is now funded, but not launched yet. So sorry, can't give the announcement, watch this space, but very interested in the data and infrastructure side of NFTs. I think what interests me is the ability for every netizen to have an official deed of ownership on the blockchain, on many blockchains. Obviously, play to earn, metaverses we're going to talk about here is a great example of that, but just the far-reaching and wide consequences of what that means to everybody, both consumers as well as businesses, is truly staggering. And I think this is an amazing primitive. And super excited to be investing, super excited to be in the space, and excited to be on this panel with everyone. So thank you again.
Great. So what I'd like to do is kind of respond to some of the statements about the excitement. And I think what I'll do is hold forth a little bit and then see, if anyone has reactions, right? Because in a way, I'm a disliker of round robin, because you ask the same question, you often get the same answers. So, I'm much more about hold forth and get reactions, right? So I think what Yat said was very astute about the idea of data rights, right? So to me, that's very, very primary. Interested in, I think Ben framed it as kind of a deed of ownership, right? So I think that's, all of this is super important, because Chris Dixon from A16Z, talks about the ownership effectively as being the central theme of Web3. So, I think that is a big deal. I did forget to introduce myself. I'm a general partner with Gumi Crypto Capital, so GCC. We're a early stage lead investor in the strategic round of OpenSea, and also a seed stage investor in Yield Guild, or YGG. So we're definitely excited about this space, and we think that there's a huge promise here. From my framing, the thing that I like to think about is the identification of the sovereignty of users' non-fungible time. And that I think user data is really actually the conversion of their non-fungible time into non-fungible data assets, right? So in a sense, like, the assertion of sovereignty is the assertion of the ownership of their time, and then the time gets converted into things like data, or in the case of something like Axie, it gets converted into SLP, or it gets converted into fungible assets, fungible or non-fungible assets, right? So I think that's kind of this seismic event that has occurred, is the declaration of the sovereignty of users' time, right? And so users who don't have anything have their time. So I think that's a twist, and I think it's causing this huge inflow. So I think that's kind of my lens around the phase change that we've seen and the reaction. So I guess anyone who's got sort of things to pile on. Yeah, please.
Yeah, just to react to that, totally agree with that. And because I think the other thing that's interesting when you think about scarcity and resource is that actually in the past, it was something that you dug up from the ground, like oil, right? But actually this particular resource actually comes from our minds. And it is actually one that is, actually really, truly, truly scarce, because each and every one of us has only a limited time on Earth, if you think of it in that context, right? So whatever we create actually has a finite time as a human. And in this case, every individual is rewarded that way. We talk about how the future has to be all creative, and then we have to promote creativity in the school and divergent thinking, but schools don't do that, because we're still ultimately trying to sort of fit our kids into essentially mass production, because we think of the world in sort of resources in that manner. But data paradigms is changing this. And if you think about who owns and controls that data, that's the other thing. It's not us, actually, which is ironic. We do own our time in the physical world. We get paid a salary for it, or we build a business from that, or whatever it is. We spend time with our family. But in the virtual world, it's owned by Facebook, by the platforms, and they're actually literally stealing our time for themselves, and creating a kind of digital colonialism. And that Web3 primitive is changing all of that, and I think actually can completely is altering the space, and which is why we think this is so exciting.
Yeah, maybe to add on here, right, on this aspect, right? So I think you see this triangle also. It's one is time, one is scarcity, but the third one is really the creativity, what we can now see and which is going to explore. But let's face it, right? In the real world, we have competition these days with, automation, robots taking over unfortunately, lots of jobs and so on. But people, they're a creative species, and that's exactly what where the let's say NFT also in combination with metaverse really help to create completely new opportunities. We always say NFT/metaverse, there's a new land of opportunities, right, where people can expand, and obviously since now they truly own those things, is really they can eventually make money and make a living out of that. And that is really the groundbreaking, which goes way beyond gaming, by the way, right? It's expanding the market by something which has never been seen before.
Yeah, and data ownership is basically really it's actually building your own equity now, right? The equity that comes from it. And I think actually that is the solution that, some people talk about AI automation, as Dirk was saying, basically creating the useless human, as it were, because of the work aspect, because, machines and robots will be doing it much better. But actually with this paradigm, I think we can move from universal basic income to universal basic equity, where the equity is relative to each other. Not everyone has the same output, but it is not one where it's a handout, which is kind of what UBI kind of feels like, but it's really one that comes from you and exclusively from you, and you decide what it is because it's your data, right? So I think the one thing that has been a problem in the past is data isn't treated as a human right. It's treated as a service. It's treated as an add-on on top of things, because we think of the human rights aspect in physical terms. But actually, data being the most valuable resource on Earth probably actually ought to be a human right because it comes from us. And that charter doesn't exist. And therefore, I think Web3 is that interesting solution around that.
Yeah, Ben, any reactions?
Yeah, I mean, with the caveat at the beginning of this, I'm not a huge gamer. I'm super excited that people are interested in this, and I think it's a great ramp on for people to understand this wider space. I think the bit that I come back to with all of this is I completely agree with everyone else on the panel about the opportunities in front of us. What I think is disappointing when I look at previous areas of things like the creator economy on YouTube is you kind of get this pyramid of the small group of people that actually create, the next sort of group of people that sort of leave comments or do some interaction, and then this thick bottom part of people that just consume. We still live in a very consumption-driven economy and a consumption-driven world. This opportunity and everything that people are talking about here is an opportunity for people to not just participate by consuming, but participate by creating, and indeed participate by owning. And I think the challenge is going to be, having been these days an older man who's been around on the internet since the early 90s, is the issue of education, or the issue of learning, and whether or not some of these new tools, these new metaverses, the idea of owning one's time, the idea of owning assets in games, whether these become interesting ramp-ons for people to understand these concepts, and then they can bring them more broadly into the rest of their life and think about where NFTs and other concepts within this paradigm actually applies. That's the bit that I hope for, is that this becomes a learning opportunity, so that little tiny chunk of people that do the creation on the kind of Web2 platforms like YouTube, that in this era, in this paradigm, we get a much thicker chunk of people really owning and really consuming and properly engaging. So that's the challenge that I'm looking to see.
I mean, I think to one of the challenges that you're describing, obviously, is, reflected in kind of foolish behavior, right? So I think crypto has been a site for foolish behavior, and we see people buying like, so-called shit coins, and obviously I think education is a part of that, right? So in a sense, like this metaverse world could be a very destructive world if everyone in it participates in the most foolish and destructive behaviors. So, I think I definitely recognize what you're saying, and I think that is an important principle. Dirk, you may have had something to add.
Yeah, just saying the economics are actually changing. When you think about it, right? When you were on YouTube or Facebook and we were a creator, right? You got paid, a fraction, of the times of people when going back to the time, right? It was just, penny. Then of course, you have to get 1 million of viewers or how many, right, in order to make an income on YouTube. But this is changing now. We're adding the creativity part to it, right? And this is where the economics, become really interesting. So you would take time, and you take creativity. So when I'm now selling, let's say, an NFT, a good, right, which I created with my time, I can maybe sell something for, let's say, $100 to 1,000 people, right? That's actually quite interesting income all of a sudden. I don't need 1 million anymore. And this will democratize, much more the economics what we are going to see. And that's, in quotation marks, I hope that, that the traditional, Web 2.0, right, is going to be disrupted by exactly that new paradigm here.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Yeah,
go ahead. Just to add on quickly, just on Ben's point, I think one thing about the exclusivity around that, right? First of all, the platforms did control that exclusivity because they're essentially kings of their particular domain. But the other thing was, of course, that because of the whole open source paradigm, the people who were able to participate in that growth actually were the people who knew how to code. So you ended up creating a new elite, which was the ones who knew engineering and who knew code inadvertently, right? That wasn't the goal, right? Now with non-fungible tokens, what's exciting here, your time becomes a parallel, but it's actually much more accessible because you don't need to know how to code. You can be an artist, a photographer, a creator, or whichever it is, right? And it broadens it. And it used to be controlled within the engineering framework for those who knew how to build it. And now, because it's on chain, because the data layer is open, to Dirk's point, everyone can start doing it. I think it'll disrupt the space, and it'll be broadening that potential to, I think of it as a mass creative liquidity event, if you will.
So I'd like to hold forth there on a question that was raised actually by our host, which is this question of what makes an NFT worth $1 million, and so to me, I come from the world of open source software, and in open source software, what I see developers competing for what I call immortality slots. Right. And so these slots represent, to me, almost like platonic ideals. So, for example, if your contribution represents, like, what is the ideal SQL database, right? So the answer is probably Postgres, right? You could say MySQL if you want, but I like Postgres. But my point is that these are slots that are sort of canonical and they're embraced by the world, and the world confers kind of a limited immortality. Now, the idea that this can be reposited as data and given this limited immortality is offered by a system like a GitHub, which is a repository, right? So we've always had this competition in history and culture. So for example, if I said there's an immortality slot for female portrait oil on canvas, a lot of you would say, well, maybe the Mona Lisa is an enduring example of a competitor for this immortality slot of culture. Right. But the thing that's happened with NFT is that these slots of culture and history are now available. Right. So in a sense, it's just the surfacing of a repository that's actually capable of conferring this limited immortality that was already available to developers. So in a sense, I'm kind of responding to what Yat was pointing out about this kind of now it's available to more people and more creators, and I think that's kind of the crux of my argument. So, I'm happy to get reactions.
Yeah, no, and to add on top of that, I think one of the things is about open source, right? Which is probably the one example where the network effect basically beat out everyone else, right? As opposed to what we're seeing with the platforms, is that the value derivative was one of time as a hire, for instance. Oh, you're a great engineer because you developed that open source code. Let me hire you for a ton of bucks, right? But actually, if the person who contributed to the code actually received even a sliver of a percentage of the contribution he created, which ended up making companies like, Huawei or Xiaomi or Lenovo or whichever company you want to name in the world, actually that might have been a better value of his time, and he would spend it differently creating new things as opposed to working for someone in a particular purpose or mission, right? So basically what it allows for now is a way to participate in the growing network effect, right? And as that network effect grows, so does your potential in the space. And that's basically what NFTs represent. CryptoPunks or Bored Apes or Sandbox Land, really what you're doing is you're buying a network effect, right? And you're not actually buying necessarily, the visual itself. I think a lot of people say, well, that's just crazy for you. What are you buying a JPEG for? Right? But what you're actually buying is community. You're buying the network. You're buying association. In the same way that when you buy something physical in the world, you make that determination too. If I decide to buy an Adidas shoe or a Puma shoe, what am I buying? 99% of what I'm buying is virtual in context, right? Is imagination, storytelling, community, network, LeBron James wears it, whatever that is, right? And the person who buys it adds to the narrative if 1,000 more people buy it, the person who has it benefits from it. So basically, it actually challenges the whole idea of the business model being traditionally sort of zero sum into one that's kind of community sum, if you will, right? And I think that's also breaking people's thinking around it, because they're like, well, you have to compete, but actually the positive competition ends up being one that grows it together, which is different from a model, right? It kills most of the traditional NBA school of thinking.
Yeah, happy to get feedback. Other comments. I'm happy to respond as well, but it looks like Ben has come off mute.
I don't know. I start off with two concepts. The first one was that, I have an open source background. I founded an open source business. You can replicate that open source project and run it anywhere, but it's pretty limited if you don't know what you're doing. You run it on a platform like the one that I founded, it suddenly becomes valuable. It's the same code. The difference is that the context, the difference was the experience, the difference was, the way it was set up. But what was interesting about open source in addition to time is that the bit, and this is getting really kind of out there, the bit is infinitely replicable, right? And that's an amazing concept that computing and technology and the internet really was able to take, its footing from was that you could create a website and it could be downloaded and accessed anywhere and as many people, and you're infinitely replicating bits. The problem is it creates no scarcity. And the problem is, which is the point we were talking about, is that it makes the concept of value, which in societies we very much think about scarcity. Like if everybody was wearing the very same shoe that some basketball player wears, then no one would really give a shit anymore. So the idea is that I have it and you don't, and there's a scarcity, and that's why the shoes cost whatever, and it's not really the bill of material. It's to create a scarcity. That's it's to be blunt again, it's not a paradigm that I'm particular. I don't wear a lot of shoes like that, but it's what people are into, and I respect it. But that was really hard to replicate onto the internet for that reason. The great thing about it was that everyone could get an equal access to the same experience, so everyone could have the great high-class experience of, I don't know, Facebook or Twitter or whatever best-of-class applications you want. So that was the concept of the infinitely replicable bit. What NFTs are offering, which I think is really interesting and why suddenly something is worth $1 million, is that somebody can actually claim ownership. They can claim that exclusivity. And I think what's really interesting for me with my own personal agenda and interest in this is they can claim utility, right? I'm not representative of mainstream America. I'm not that interested of whether my profile picture is a CryptoPunk or not. I don't really care either way. But if something is going to give me access, if something is going to provide me with utility, whether it's part of a club that gives me benefits, or it's part of access to some service or something like that, and that's being run on a decentralized system, that's very different than the infinitely replicable bit, which is what we sort of had in the first 20 years of the internet. And that's what I think is really exciting.
Well, and I'd like to respond a little bit to your idea of utility, which is I think of it more like rights. Right, which is what rights are conferred, right? And what is the engine that kind of handles the management of your rights? And to me, like a lot of the rights right now are adjudicated by game engines, right? So the game engine tells you what your rights are. It's like, oh, you swing the sword, you get 10 damage. Like, okay, those are your rights. And game engine takes care of that for you. What I wanted to respond to with what Yat mentioned is he mentioned community, right? So the ancient Greeks had a word kleos, and that was what the character Achilles was seeking. And you could translate that as fame. But what it really is it's a limited immortality. And what it is it's what people say about you when you're not there. And I think what the Greeks understood is that the greatest time period when you're not there is after you're dead, right? So in a sense, like that was what Achilles was seeking. And I think scarcity. The idea... Absolutely, right? And so in a sense, the community value. So this idea of what makes an NFT worth $1 million is it's kind of contribution to culture, history, the creation of an immortality slot, right? And this concept of kleos, right? This idea that like there's a network effect around this object and that people are admiring it. So Dirk came off of mute. So.
Miko, yeah, Miko, I like to challenge that a little bit, right? Because earlier we said, hey, there's, we had this little top of the iceberg, right, on YouTube or wherever, right, where a small number of creators right, made all the money. All I hear right now is, oh, this is NFT, this is worth $1 million, $50 million, and so on. I mean, that's the narrative in all the media. right? And I think that's not, I think that's not what is so exciting about it. It's really more about the small amounts, that everyone can get access to it. And then it comes back to the question is all what NFTs really are. They are systems of beliefs. I join, it can be very tribal. We all know that, right? Currently, especially, right, in the NFT space, in the blockchain space, and so on. But once we overcome that, and once we democratize it, that everyone can really, inter-exchange it. And once we go away from the narrative that only the top should earn, and hey, this is $1 million worth, and so on. So I think then we really achieved something. I think we're quite a little bit further away from that. But otherwise, we just run the same, the same path which we've run always before. So I'm a little concerned about that if we continue with the narrative, to be honest.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I like to get a little combative. So Yat maybe has a reaction.
Yeah, no, great. So first of all, totally agree with everything here. I think one of the things about the community effect on this one is that when you think of NFTs, they don't have to be the manufacturer scarcity only, which is what happens a lot with art and photos. Oh, I'm only issuing 5 or 10. It's actually, you could issue millions of the same object, but then it depends on what people do to it, right? It's like our relationship with wedding rings. Wedding rings as a community really only have a special value to just maybe 10 of us, 20 of us, or a family. And maybe if it's a very famous person, it might have a different kind of immortality, right? I love the concept of kleos and immortality as a concept here. But I think that is sort of, maybe as a community that is small enough, but has that power sort of in and of itself, right? The other thing that's really precious is that you can add communities on top because of composability, right? Meaning that it may have this utility today, right? I mean, it's like Pokemon cards in the physical world. It was meant for a game. Who knew it was going to turn into valuable sort of collectibles, right? And go crazy like this. Or trading cards with, Major League Baseball. They were add-ons for chewing gum, right? Before they actually ended up becoming valuable, tradable collectibles thereafter, and used in different cultural ways, right? So I think what's so powerful about NFTs is that, they store all these moments of, immortal culture, if you will. And then in this case with NFTs, you can take them with you and transfer them and move them around. And look at loot. Right, the composability on top of that is almost ridiculous, you would say. A bunch of words, what the hell, right? But, it captures the imagination, because that's after all what, we have as humans, and puts incredible things on top on this paradigm where everyone is building on top of, a bunch of words, right? Which now we can own a piece of that network effect as it grows. And I just get really excited.
No, and I have to apologize, right? Because we are really creeping up to the top of the hour, which is a shame, because I think we do have a wealth of knowledge here on this panel. And one of the things I did want to respond to is that when we think about loot and the distribution of loot, one of the things that I can't help thinking about is Yield Guild, the YGG, which is a guild whose sole function is to distribute the proceeds of collective action. And the reason why I wanted to mention them is that they're really evidence of something new that's forming, because people look at this as the first metaverse labor union. And as a labor union, people look at them and say, well, they're just a bunch of socialists, right? But at the same time, they're operating probably one of the world's largest metaverse hedge funds, right? So they're running around buying up in-game items and NFTs and land and everything else. So you look at them again and you're like, wow, they're just a bunch of capitalists, right? But the thing that I think is kind of really interesting is that they're not random, because the things they're buying are the things that the players are using to generate yield, right? So the socialist branch and the capitalist branch are operating together in this new synergy, right? So, I just wanted to kind of claim that something new is happening here. So I think, the old models are being challenged, and I just wanted to just toss it out there. I know that unfortunately we're short on time, so I'll get quick reactions and then we'll call it quickly, if we can.
Maybe on this one, yeah. Look, it's capitalism is changing. I think the old form of capitalism was sort of the basis of the industrial sort of revolution, and that age is all sort of subject to change. When you think about what the internet did, you could argue that the internet was probably an ultra socialist view of knowledge and information. And it disrupted perhaps that type of information that was knowledge, that was money, right? The sort of the information arbitrage that existed, like decades before in the internet came about, and that's changing. But capitalism was due for a change anyway, right? And I think this idea where you talk about, it's either capitalist or socialist, right? It's a new system. Yield Guild sort of demonstrates that, I think, in a great way, where you can be sort of social thinking in the way that you do certain things and more inclusive, but yet have a very capitalist viewpoint. The token economy and the token incentives is perhaps as ultra-capitalist as it gets, and yet it works from an incentive building standpoint. So I think these are new paradigms. And frankly, in the future, when we go even deeper, you look at DAOs, for instance. I actually think DAOs, will have more power or maybe equal power to the way governments are run. In fact, I think DAOs are going to invade governments, are going to invade politics. Right? If you think about what Axie's doing.
Yeah, they're definitely a governance function. I think Dirk came off of mute. I'll let him kind of, maybe Ben can have the final word.
My closing words is actually using words of a famous German philosopher, the three phases, of truth. The first phase is, you come up with something and it's really cool. Everybody laughs at you. The second phase is, it's opposed. Is that no, we never did that here, so why we won't do it. And the third phase is then, it's self-evident. Every said, I told you, so I knew that it was going to happen. That's what we're going to see with the NFTs as well.
Wonderful. And Ben, closing note.
Just really quickly, I think we're in a really interesting experimental phase. We can get some stuff wrong. We can get far out into the edges and come back the way that this is people calling this socialism or post-capitalism, whatever. I think like everything and what we've seen in the internet before, it'll contract somewhere in the middle. We're kind of here in this kind of sort of middle ground. We explore the edges, and then over time we kind of end up in this kind of middle ground, and that's probably where it'll go. I implore people to explore those edges. We should all be doing that. Where we'll end up, I don't know, but let's have fun exploring.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like we've got another exciting panel coming up, so I'd love to hand back to the Crowdcreate team. So thank you so much to my panelists. Apologies for not having enough time for all of you, but definitely super exciting to talk to you all.